La promesa de Mariana nació en medio del dolor y la esperanza, cuando la vida parecía desmoronarse a su alrededor, y el hogar que alguna vez fue refugio se había convertido en un campo silencioso de heridas emocionales. No era una promesa hecha a la ligera, ni a otra persona, sino a sí misma. Mariana entendía que sanar un hogar roto no comenzaba con grandes gestos o palabras vacías, sino con la paciencia de reconstruir los lazos rotos desde adentro, con la ternura de quien riega una planta marchita, esperando verla florecer nuevamente. Su historia no es solo la de una mujer enfrentando la adversidad, sino la de cualquiera que ha tenido que sostener un hogar en ruinas mientras intenta no quebrarse por dentro. Mariana había sido testigo de cómo el amor se desgasta cuando los silencios se vuelven más fuertes que las palabras, cuando la rutina reemplaza la risa y las miradas ya no buscan encontrarse. Pero ella también sabía que rendirse no era una opción, porque en ese hogar habitaban más que recuerdos. Estaban las risas de sus hijas, los sueños que un día compartieron y la promesa de que todo podía cambiar si se tenía la voluntad de sanar. Cada día era una batalla entre el cansancio y la fe, entre el miedo de repetir los errores y la esperanza de construir algo nuevo sobre las ruinas de lo viejo. La sanación para Mariana comenzó con los pequeños actos: preparar el desayuno aún cuando no había palabras de agradecimiento, sonreír cuando el corazón pedía llorar, escuchar cuando solo quería hablar. Comprendió que sanar no significaba olvidar lo que dolía, sino aceptar lo vivido como parte del proceso. Cada discusión pasada, cada lágrima contenida, eran piezas que formaban su historia, y negarlas era negar su propio crecimiento. Así, Mariana eligió transformar el dolor en aprendizaje, la culpa en compasión y la distancia en oportunidad para reencontrarse. Poco a poco, el hogar empezó a respirar de nuevo. No fue un cambio repentino, sino una transformación silenciosa que nacía de su constancia. Empezó a hablar con sus hijas sobre lo que sentían, no solo sobre lo que debían hacer. Les enseñó que el amor no es perfecto, que las personas se equivocan, pero también se perdonan. Mostró con su ejemplo que la fuerza no siempre se demuestra resistiendo, sino sabiendo cuándo soltar y cuándo volver a abrazar. En ese proceso, también aprendió a perdonarse a sí misma por no haber sido siempre la madre o la esposa perfecta. Comprendió que su valor no estaba en mantener las apariencias de un hogar intacto, sino en su capacidad de reconstruirlo desde el alma. El padre, que antes parecía ausente en su propio cansancio, comenzó a notar el cambio. No fue por reproches ni exigencias, sino por la calma con la que Mariana había decidido vivir. Su serenidad empezó a contagiar al resto, como una brisa que limpia el aire después de una tormenta. Las niñas volvieron a reír, la casa recuperó su sonido natural y Mariana entendió que había cumplido su promesa. Sanar un hogar roto no significa devolverlo a lo que era antes, sino convertirlo en algo nuevo, más sabio y más real. La promesa de Mariana es, en esencia, una historia de amor profundo, pero no del amor romántico que se desvanece con el tiempo, sino del amor que sobrevive a la tristeza y al desgaste. Es una lección de vida sobre la resiliencia y la ternura, sobre cómo un corazón decidido puede transformar su entorno sin imponer, solo guiando con ejemplo y comprensión. Sanar un hogar roto requiere más que palabras bonitas. Exige humildad, empatía y la decisión de seguir creyendo incluso cuando todo parece perdido. Y cuando al fin lo logra, no solo sana a su familia, sino también a sí misma, porque en cada acto de amor verdadero hay una semilla de redención que florece donde antes solo había dolor. Healing begins within, and for Mariana, this realization came not as a sudden revelation, but as a quiet awakening born from exhaustion and heartache. She had spent years trying to fix everything around her, mending arguments, softening silences, and pretending things were fine even when the air at home felt heavy with unspoken pain. Yet nothing changed because she was pouring from an empty cup. The more she tried to hold her family together, the more she felt herself falling apart inside. It was in those moments of solitude, after the children had gone to bed and the house was silent, that she began to understand that true healing could not start in the walls of the home until it began in her own heart. She started by facing her emotions instead of hiding from them. There were nights when tears came without invitation, when she finally allowed herself to feel everything she had buried for years: anger, disappointment, fear, and longing. For the first time, she didn't try to suppress them or label them as weakness. She simply let them exist. In doing so, she discovered that emotions, no matter how painful, are not enemies, but guides. They point to the places inside that still ache for understanding and care. This process of facing herself was not easy, but it was necessary, because healing begins when one stops running from what hurts and learns to sit with it until it loses power. Mariana also realized that self-forgiveness was part of this inner healing. For a long time, she had carried the guilt of not being perfect, the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect woman. She blamed herself for the cracks in her marriage and for the moments when she felt too tired to give more. But little by little, she began to see that perfection was never the goal. Presence was. She learned to forgive herself for being human, for breaking under pressure, and for needing time to heal. That forgiveness became a form of freedom, allowing her to love herself without conditions and to see her worth beyond her mistakes. As she tended to her inner wounds, her perception of her surroundings began to change. The same house that once felt like a burden started to feel like a space for renewal. Her mornings began with quiet moments of gratitude, just a cup of coffee and a few deep breaths before the day's noise began. Those small rituals became her anchors. She no longer chased peace from others. She created it within herself. And that peace began to radiate outward, subtly influencing the atmosphere of her home. When her heart softened, her words became gentler, her patience deeper, and her presence more healing for those around her. This inner work also helped Mariana understand that healing was not about forgetting the past or pretending that everything was fine. It was about acknowledging what happened and choosing to grow from it. She stopped expecting her family to change first. Instead, she focused on being the calm in the storm, the steady hand in moments of tension. By healing her own pain, she stopped reacting from wounds and began responding from wisdom. Her energy shifted from survival to compassion, and that shift changed the dynamic of the entire household. Over time, the people around her began to respond differently too. Her daughters felt safer expressing their feelings. Her husband began to notice the warmth returning to her voice, and the house that once echoed with distance began to fill with gentle laughter again. None of this happened overnight, but it all began with her decision to look inward. Healing, she realized, was not about fixing others. It was about tending to her own soul so that she could offer love from a place of wholeness. By choosing to heal herself first, Mariana became the foundation upon which the rest of her family could begin to rebuild. She became living proof that when a heart finds peace within, that peace naturally extends to everything and everyone it touches. The power of small acts was something Mariana came to understand slowly, through repetition and reflection, not through advice or theory. At first, she believed that to heal her family and bring harmony back into her home, she would need to make big changes or deliver emotional speeches that could somehow erase the years of distance and misunderstanding. But she soon discovered that real change never happens through grand gestures. It begins in the quiet, simple moments that seem insignificant at first glance. Every small act of love and patience she chose each day became a thread, and over time, those threads wove together the fragile fabric of a renewed family bond. Her mornings began with small rituals that carried meaning. She would wake a little earlier to prepare breakfast, even when she felt tired. It wasn't just about food. It was her silent way of offering care. She learned that healing doesn't always need to be announced. It can be served on a plate, shared in a smile, or shown in the gentle way she brushed her daughter's hair. These moments were her quiet affirmations that love was still alive in that home, even when words failed. When her husband came home from work exhausted, instead of letting the silence hang heavy, she offered him a cup of tea and a simple question about his day. Sometimes he didn't answer much, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had opened the door for connection. The more she practiced kindness in small doses, the more she began to see their power ripple through her family. Her daughters, once withdrawn and cautious, started to laugh more freely, sensing the softness returning to their mother's eyes. There were fewer raised voices and more moments of calm. What Mariana understood through this was that small acts carry emotional weight. They signal to others that it's safe to love again, that someone still cares enough to try. Each small effort became a seed, and though it took time for those seeds to sprout, they eventually filled the home with warmth. Mariana also noticed how these acts changed her from within. The simple act of making time for her family shifted her perspective from resentment to gratitude. She began to notice the beauty in moments she used to overlook, the way sunlight touched the table in the morning, the laughter of her children playing, even the quiet sighs after long days. Those details reminded her that life's beauty is built from ordinary things. And when she focused on those details, the heaviness she once carried started to lift, replaced by quiet contentment. The power of small acts lies in their consistency. One kind gesture might seem meaningless, but repeated over time, it builds trust, understanding, and love. Mariana saw that her family began to mirror her behavior. When she showed patience, they responded with calm. When she expressed gratitude, her daughters began to do the same. Without forcing change, she inspired it. Her actions became a form of unspoken leadership that slowly healed the home from the inside out. There were still difficult days, moments when tempers flared or silence returned. But Mariana no longer viewed those moments as failures. She understood that healing wasn't linear and that progress often hid behind setbacks. So she kept showing up, one small act at a time. A note left on the fridge, a warm meal shared in silence, a soft laugh after an awkward moment. She realized that love doesn't need to be loud to be real. It only needs to be consistent. In time, her family came to understand that her quiet gestures weren't habits. They were her way of rebuilding the bridge between them. The little things she did daily became symbols of her devotion and reminders that love lives in the details. Through them, Mariana proved that healing a broken home doesn't require perfection or dramatic change. It requires patience, presence, and a heart willing to keep giving in small but meaningful ways. These acts, though tiny in isolation, became the foundation of something lasting, something beautiful, something whole once again. Forgiveness and acceptance became the turning point in Mariana's healing journey, though reaching that place took time and deep inner struggle. For years, she carried the weight of resentment, replaying moments that had hurt her and silently questioning why things had turned out the way they did. She had expected that if others changed or apologized, she would finally feel at peace. But that peace never came. Instead, the anger she held on to became a quiet shadow that followed her everywhere, seeping into her tone, her patience, and her ability to love freely. One evening, after another small misunderstanding had left the house heavy with tension, she sat alone in the kitchen and realized something profound. The anger wasn't protecting her anymore. It was imprisoning her. From that night on, she began the slow and painful process of forgiving, not to erase what happened, but to free herself from carrying it any longer. Forgiveness for Mariana started with herself. She looked back on all the times she had been harsh on her own heart, blaming herself for every problem, believing she should have done more, said less, or been stronger. The guilt of imperfection, weighed on her because she had always been the one trying to keep everything together. But as she reflected, she saw that she had done the best she could with what she knew at the time. She realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing mistakes. It was about understanding the humanity behind them. Slowly, she learned to speak to herself with kindness instead of criticism. Each act of self-compassion chipped away at the guilt that had built up inside her, making space for peace to enter. Once she began to forgive herself, it became easier to forgive others. She started to see her husband not as an enemy or source of disappointment, but as a person equally flawed and lost in his own battles. She began to understand that hurt people often hurt others without realizing it. This understanding didn't make his actions right, but it allowed her to let go of the need to constantly hold him accountable for the past. She stopped waiting for a perfect apology and instead decided that her healing would not depend on his words or behavior. It was hers to claim. By accepting that the past could not be rewritten, she allowed herself to live in the present again. Acceptance became a companion to forgiveness. Mariana understood that healing wasn't about pretending that pain never existed or trying to recreate the past. It was about accepting that things had changed and that people were not who they used to be. There were moments when nostalgia would wash over her and she would grieve for the version of her family that once felt whole. But even in that grief, she found gratitude for the lessons learned. Acceptance gave her strength to stop fighting what she couldn't control and to focus on what she could nurture. The present connection with her children, the quiet companionship that still existed between her and her husband, and the renewed peace she was building within herself. Through forgiveness and acceptance, Mariana found freedom. The bitterness that once clouded her heart began to dissolve, replaced by a deep sense of calm. Her voice softened, her patience expanded, and her laughter returned. Those around her noticed the change, not because she demanded it, but because her energy had shifted. She was no longer reacting from wounds, but responding from wisdom. She had discovered that forgiveness was not a single act, but a daily choice, a decision to release anger, to embrace imperfection, and to keep moving forward even when memories of pain tried to pull her back. In the end, forgiveness and acceptance became the foundation upon which she rebuilt her life. They allowed her to love again without fear and to live without resentment. By forgiving, she didn't forget the past. She transformed it into something meaningful. And by accepting what was, she opened herself to what could be, a home no longer haunted by what went wrong, but alive with the quiet peace that comes from a heart finally at rest.